Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning as well. Happy Monday. I hope you're all having a fantastic Monday so far. I've heard a few people having a bit of a sad Monday with a couple of tech issues. That's not a great start to your week. So I hope this call kind of gets you away from any issues going on in your work week and has a nice, happy and inspiring start to the week. If anyone doesn't know me, hi, I'm Vanessa. I am part of the community team here at Andela, and today I'm really excited to be helping out with our Java community call. This is my first Java community call, so do excuse me if some of my terminology isn't great. It's been a while since I've done Java, I'm not going to lie, but always a great language and a great set of tools to be working with. So I'm very excited for today's call. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invite our special guest on stage now in a moment, and we're going to start the call off with a poll. Before we do so, I just want to let you know that you can join in the conversation on screen. You can see a chat tab over to the right hand side. Do send GIFs, send resources, reactions, and react to other people's posts over there. And you can also ask questions throughout today's call. Go over to the Q&A tab and ask your questions. Don't forget, you can also upvote on any of those questions as well. Lots of information, but lots of excitement. I see Feiji in the chat, Isaac and Amuda also in the chat, having a lot of fun already. And hello, Lucky. That's a great name to have on a good Monday afternoon. So, our special guest today has over a decade worth of experience with Java, working on products such as Guardian Life, Nokia, Comcast, eBay, and the list goes on. He's currently the principal program engineer at Microsoft for Java. Can everyone raise their hands, get really excited in the chat for Reza Rahman? Hello, Reza.
Hi there. I hope you can all hear me.
We can, yes.
Hope you can hear me all right.
Yep, we can hear you. Yep.
All right, excellent. The volume is a bit down on my side. I'm going to try to see if I can.
If anyone is having issues with volume, you can turn the stage up. There should be an icon to turn your stage volume up as well. So, Reza, do you think we'll start off with our poll today?
Yeah, let's do that.
Perfect. So we want to know, and I'm going to add this to the stage as well so everyone can see how we're voting. Do you plan on migrating to Jakarta EE, and when? I think this is a really important question for you, isn't it, Reza? Of kind of making sure that people are maybe thinking about migrating already before you dig into all of the incredible new features. So you should be able to vote in the poll to let us know when you plan on migrating to Jakarta EE. A few people are unsure. That's okay. That's what today's call's for. We'll change your mind. Don't worry. A few people not sure. A few people hoping to within the next 6 months. Is 6 months a good roadmap to have, or should we be aiming for maybe a 3-month roadmap to migration?
It really just depends on the application. It's good data to have. Obviously, we're going to be running a larger survey on this actually not too long from now. So we will know some of this data already.
Perfect. I'm going to leave the poll open for another few seconds. So get your votes in. A lot of people are unsure. I think we can change their minds. We can get you more excited today. Fantastic. I'm going to give you 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, some last minute votes there. Only one person has migrated already. If you're that person, do let us know in the chat. We'd love to maybe bring you on stage later on today and have a quick chat if there's time. Fantastic. I love that poll. So Reza, I'm going to leave the stage to you. I'm going to hand over to your slides and let you take it away. See you all later.
All All right, fair enough. So first of all, we spent a little bit of time with introductions. Let me spend just a little bit more time on introductions a bit. So actually, I've been working on Java EE for since about midway 2000. So it's been almost 20 years now. Yeah, so I've been involved in the when it was called Java EE. I was a user when it was called J2EE, and then I began to engage in the Java community process when it was Java E5, and I've been involved ever since actually. So yeah, in my day job, I'm principal program manager for Java on Azure. I mean, I used to be an independent consultant for some years, and then I sort of got into Java E5, Java E6 back in the day. Wrote a book about it, did a bunch of talking, and then eventually got hired by Oracle as the principal evangelist to actually go and evangelize the Java E technology. And then now, of course, I moved over to Microsoft. And we'll talk about this in a moment. Java EE is no more. We should now be talking about Jakarta EE, and this is actually Jakarta EE's third edition, fourth edition at this point. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. So I'm actually doing today's talk not really part of my day job, but part of another group of people called the Jakarta EE ambassadors. I'll talk about the Jakarta EE ambassadors in a moment also. The other thing I'd like to point out is, you should feel free to ask me questions throughout. You can just post it in the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat and pause every now and then to make sure I'm answering your questions. Or you can use the sort of official Q&A mechanism. It's up to you. It doesn't really matter that much per se. I'll leave that up to you. But beyond that, I am here to connect with you. Part of the reasons I try to do, frankly, these talks in person when I'm able to is to connect with the community and sort of understand where you stand, what your thoughts are, how we could be helping you both from a Java EE standpoint as well as the ambassador standpoint. But if you want to contact me later on, I will leave my contact page in the chat. Aside from that, I have already posted the slide deck. In the slide deck, in the first page, you will see my email address and Twitter handle. So after the fact, feel free to reach out to me, and certainly I'll always love to hear from you. That is, if you will, the primary objective, if you will, of doing these kind of talks. Now, before I get into this talk, let me tell you, this talk is actually a Jakarta EE Ambassadors shared resource. So this slide deck is available in the Jakarta EE Ambassadors website. If you dig around, you'll see it. It's relatively easy to find. This talk actually does have speaker notes included in there as well. And the objective of this talk is actually for me, sort of the trainer. So you should be able to take get the PowerPoint or if you like Google Slides version of this talk and actually pick it up and present it yourself. To some extent, this is actually part of my objectives as well, other than making you aware of what exactly is in Jakarta E10, what has transpired, perhaps since Java EE days, and also, maybe what is to come in the future. And I also will talk a little bit about, how you all can contribute to make all of that happen. In fact, that is part of where the Jakarta EE ambassadors part comes in, and I'll discuss it. I'll connect the dots there in a moment as well. Okay, so I think that's enough of an introduction. Let's dive right into it. And if I can figure out my cursor, that is, then we can dive right into it. All right, so if you haven't heard of what Jakarta EE is before, it is basically the technology formerly known as Java EE, and even before that was known as J2EE. Java EE essentially was part of the Java platform. Since the very beginning, I think that Java EE was first introduced sometime in very early 2000 as part of the Java platform, and was developed in basically the Java community process. Now, a few years ago, though, a lot of us made an effort to make Java EE more open. So instead of having it hosted in the JCP, which is really part of Oracle, we wanted to host it in an open place where anyone can contribute. And a few years ago, we actually did make that happen. So Java EE, the technology formerly known as Java EE, is no more. Now you have Jakarta EE, and the Jakarta EE has moved to the Eclipse Foundation, essentially in completely open governance. So as you know, the JCP is not a nonprofit organization. Again, it's just a department of Oracle versus the Eclipse Foundation, which is a nonprofit and which owns essentially now all of the IP for Jakarta EE. So anybody that wants, can contribute and move forward any part of Jakarta EE that they like. By comparison to the JCP, it has still some similarities. So there is still open governance and well-defined governance. The difference, though, is that in the Eclipse Foundation, everything really is open source, including the compatibility test kit. It used to be that the compatibility test kit was not open source. Now it is, though, and the way the compatibility program works now is like you can essentially self-certify. You go and download the TCK, run the TCK by yourself, and then you submit your TCK results to the Eclipse Foundation to say, hey, I am now certified against Jakarta EE or a particular component specification of Jakarta EE. So again, some things are the same and some things are different. So we still have a well-defined specification process. It's a little bit different than the one in the JCP, but also relatively similar in most ways. There is a very clear IP flow, and in the JCP, so Oracle used to own a large part of the IP. That is no longer the case now. Now the Eclipse Foundation really owns all of the intellectual property at the end of the day, which makes it possible for anybody to move the technology if they wanted to. It is still vendor neutral, and I think even more vendor neutral at this point at the Eclipse Foundation. Sort of under the JCP, Oracle used to have some special powers, some special veto abilities, and sort of not as collaborative as we would like it, if you will. But that is now all has changed. All has changed, and now really I can say it is a level playing field. And even as an individual, if you'd like to go ahead and lead a spec, you can now do that. Now, most importantly, in all of these transition processes, we didn't lose anyone, right? So all of the key stakeholders, namely Oracle, IBM, Red Hat, Payara, VMware, they're still involved. If you could look at the membership of Jakarta EE, these are still the key stakeholders. But the key thing, honestly, that is still missing is the community participation and contributions, right? So one of the reasons why we wanted to move away from the JCP into the Eclipse, something like the Eclipse Foundation, is to actually facilitate contribution from end users and developers and the companies utilizing Jakarta EE rather than writing an implementation. And I'd say that is still lagging behind. And frankly, if there's one thing that I would like to change as part of this talk is to encourage you to think along those lines and to think about, hey, this is an important technology. You actually, there's an open door for you. You can actually go ahead and contribute to this technology if you wanted to. So that is about it in terms of a broad overview of Jakarta EE. I'm going to stop right now and move forward into more of the nitty-gritty details of beginning to talk about the Jakarta EE releases. If you want to find out more about Jakarta EE, though, the website is really, really simple. It's simply jakarta.ee, and you can log in and find out all information that you want about Jakarta EE. So with that, I'm not going to pause this time, but if you do have questions on any of this, feel free to either post a Q&A or just post in the chat. I will just verbally answer here if you do have any questions. Okay, do we use Jakarta EE and Spring Framework interchangeably, or do they work collectively? Let's talk about that in a moment. I'll answer that in a moment. It's a good question. Okay, so next thing we should talk about is why is Jakarta EE so important? And this will get into answering the question about Jakarta EE and Spring Framework, if you will. So the reality is that Jakarta EE really is very foundational to most people don't realize this, but it's a foundational technology set. Just like in fact Java SE, right? So there's Java SE, and Java SE definitely, if you are doing any kind of Java development, you're using Java SE. But believe it or not, for the most part, even if you're doing any kind of Java development, you're actually most likely also using Jakarta EE directly or indirectly as well, right? So you're using Jakarta EE very directly if you're using one of the application servers, and believe it or not, there's a large portion of people that still do, and continue to develop, even in some cases, new applications on these platforms. They're not on Reddit, they're not on Twitter, so you don't see them. But reality is certainly we see this in our own customer base on Azure. and we see this in all of the broad-based industry surveys. The reality is about a quarter, so 1 in every 4 or 1 in every 3 developer is actually still running on one of these application servers and developing applications on the application servers that have been around for some years now. So if you're using Wildfly, Pyara, Glassfish, JBoss AP, Webster Liberty, or WebLogic, guess what? You are actually developing with Jakarta EE APIs. Now let's assume for a second that you are not, right? And again, in our customer base and in general in the industry surveys, we do see that okay, so another 30 to 70, rather, I'm sorry, I have the numbers flipped. Another, let's say 60 to 70% of developers are not using Java EE, they're using something else, right? They're perhaps using Spring, they're perhaps using some of the newer runtimes like Quarkus, or they're using Microprofile or what have you. Well, guess what? Even if you're doing that, all of those technologies are actually built on one or more Jakarta EE APIs. At the bare minimum, they probably are used based on servlet, most likely a lot more than servlet. Right? You're probably using JPA, JTA potentially, JMS, in some cases JSF, JSP. All of those are basically Jakarta EE technologies. So the way this actually works out is that most likely 70 to 80% of Java developers are dependent on, are using or are using sometimes the entire Jakarta EE platform, if not some portion of the Jakarta EE platform. So if you're using something like Tomcat or Hibernate or ActiveMQ or Jetty or CXF or Eclipse Jersey or JBoss REST-TC, well, guess what? Those all implement one Jakarta EE API, in some cases more than one Jakarta EE API. If you're using something like Quarkus, or you think you're using Microprofile, or you think you use Spring, well, guess what? All of those are based on essentially Jakarta EE technologies in one way or the other. In particular, they probably are abstracting Jakarta EE in some way, but they cannot actually run without Jakarta EE. So this is some of the information along these lines. So that tells you a little bit more about how the industry landscape looks like in practicality when you take a look at it in a holistic way. So this information comes from the 2022 Jakarta EE Developer Survey. I do have a link on the slide deck. You can feel free to take a look at it. There's actually a lot of other very good information in the survey as well. And the next edition of the survey is actually coming out sometime in late March. So do be on the lookout for that. So as you can see, yes, Spring Boot in this survey, the way it hashes out is about 60% developers using either Spring or Spring Boot, which by the way also uses Jakarta EE APIs, as I just mentioned. If not, in this particular survey, more than 50% actually reported that they are using Jakarta EE. Now, they probably are not using Jakarta EE directly in some cases, but in many cases they probably are. What's interesting is also the microprofile numbers in the survey. That's about close to 30%, and the numbers you would expect from something like Micronaut and Drop Wizard. And we'll talk about Micronaut in particular in a moment as well. All right. So I think we can consider this question answered. If it's, I don't know who marks it as answered, but we can mark the question answered, so we can move forward. All right. Now a little bit of historical perspective. I think it's important to have that historical perspective for something that has been around as long as Jakarta EE has at this point. So it all started back in the late 90s in something called JPE. And I kind of quiz people, do they even know what JPE is? But if you don't know, I'll tell you, it's Java Professional Edition. It used to be Java Standard Edition and Java Professional Edition back in the day. Then there was a J2EE era, and that lasted for quite a bit. So 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, I actually began using Java EE, Jakarta EE back in the J2EE 1.4 days. And that is basically, this is when Java, what we understand today as Java SE, used to be called J2SE. I don't know how many people know that. But then we went through a sort of a cleanup of the naming, and we didn't call it J2SE anymore. We actually called it Java SE. And similarly, we began to call the technology formerly known as J2E Java EE instead, and that was Java EE5. And this is the time frame when I actually began to be very heavily involved in the development of the specifications themselves. So fast forward, the JCP was the Java EE was developed under the JCP all the way until Java EE8, which a surprising number of people are still on Java EE8. And I'm hoping that's going to change very soon, sooner rather than later, because now you do have a new version with Jakarta E10 that has new features. So we weren't able to deliver features for a while, really. The transition process took, I think, the time that you would kind of expect to happen. First there was Jakarta E8, and that was really nothing much more than just a binary compatible version of Java E8, but all of the IP moved to the Eclipse Foundation, the TCK moving to the Eclipse Foundation, and really releasing product compatible products from Jakarta E8 through the Eclipse Foundation. That is a huge move, and in fact, in terms of the technology industry, these type of moves don't usually happen. So the fact that this happened successfully is really, for all of us, was remarkable. We were biting our fingernails for quite a while as to whether that is going to actually successfully happen and go through all the legal hurdles and literally millions of lines of code being donated from Oracle into the Eclipse Foundation. But that did happen, and we did have Jakarta E8. After that, we had two releases of Jakarta E9. I'll talk about that in a moment. Jakarta E 9.0 and Jakarta E 9.1. Okay, and then finally we had new features and new updates, released just about, I would say, a few months ago, last year, with Jakarta E10, and there's already some implementations of Jakarta E10. We'll talk about those in a moment also. So the main thing that happened in Jakarta E9, which I'll talk about in my next slide, is that you notice that the name change, right? So name change from Java EE to Jakarta EE. But in Jakarta E8, we continue to use the namespace JavaX. Right? So everything under J2E and Java EE was under the JavaX package. But because we wanted to rebrand and rename, and we needed to have a clean break, both in terms of intellectual property as well as the branding, we had to rename all of the packages that the Java EE APIs were under from JavaX to Jakarta. So Jakarta E9 really was all about that, is moving all of the APIs from the JavaX namespace into the Jakarta E namespace, and that's really the only change. Right? So changing the XML namespace, changing the Java package names, all from JavaX to Jakarta. And then finally, in Jakarta E10, we were able to actually bring about innovations, bring about changes to the APIs themselves. Now, for Jakarta E developers, the people that have been doing Java E for a little while, this has not really been a big deal. The reason for this is because of another thing called microprofile. Right? So we knew as an industry that this kind of transition processes usually take time. So what happened was to create another set of specifications called microprofile to essentially keep moving the technology forward in the microservices domain while we finish the transition from Java EE to Jakarta, and now hopefully we can move mostly Jakarta EE10 forward as well as a microprofile a little bit in some senses as well. So really, as a Java EE developer, you probably will, for some period of time, use two different technology sets, Jakarta EE being one and microprofile being the other. Okay. All right, let me move forward. I don't see any questions as of yet, so I'm going to keep going. So one other thing to understand is that just like Java, Jakarta EE is an ecosystem. All right, so so there's many different parts of this ecosystem, and if you look at a lot of the industry analysis, there's actually many different bits and pieces of the Jakarta ecosystem. So sensibly, what happens is, I think at this point, something like Java E8 still is sort of the majority of the Jakarta user base, and that is basically in the late majority. But now, really, people should at least be thinking about moving to Jakarta E8. So that is in the early majority. It's binary compatible. There's really no change other than basically changing the Maven dependency coordinates, and that's about it. You're basically moved to Jakarta E8 from Java E8. In that same late majority space, you also see things like microprofile. And again, microprofile is just about as old as Jakarta EE at this point. In fact, it has more changes in it because, like I said, it was a separate set of specifications that was spun up in the time frame when we began the transition from Java EE to Jakarta EE. So that is now in the early majority phase. A lot of applications out there, a lot of Java EE developers already supporting microprofile and pretty much all of the Java EE runtimes supporting microprofile. Quarkus, I think, is a new entry into the early majority space. And again, Quarkus is really nothing much more than very soon it's going to be a Jakarta E10 core profile implementation. So it's really heavily dependent on microprofile specifications as well as Jakarta E specifications. Now, in the early adopters phase, and I hope more people are going to be moving into this, hopefully adopting Jakarta E9 at some point soon, right? Because now is the time to move. If you want to begin to utilize the new features that are coming out of Jakarta E10, or at least you need to begin to move into Jakarta E9 already. There's other sort of Jakarta E families runtimes that are in the early adopters phase. Helidon is a really good one. If you haven't seen Helidon yet, I recommend you take a look at it. One of the coolest features about Helidon right now is that they are themselves an early adopter of virtual threads. So very, very interesting framework, all based on Jakarta E and microprofile. And that is called out in the innovator space. So if you see here, and then finally, Jakarta E10 is in the innovator space right now. So you should at least be taking a look at and learning about what is in Jakarta E10 and maybe beginning to begin your migration process, or in subsequent years, right? Maybe one year and 2 year time frame. That is what I would expect, sort of healthy adopter of the Java EE and Jakarta EE ecosystem. So I'll talk a little bit about Jakarta EE 9 and 9.1 next. So again, the primary change here is the move from the namespace from Javax to Jakarta. The other thing that happened in the Jakarta EE 9 time span in particular is removing some of the older technologies. So as you can see in Java, this technology has been around for a little while. Some of the things in there are not as relevant as they used to be. So there is a process of essentially removing more and more of the older APIs, and some of that happened in Jakarta E9. Some of that also happened in Jakarta E10. I'll talk about that in a moment as well when we take a look at the actual changes in Jakarta E and Jakarta E10. The other thing that happened was that the baseline has been updated throughout, right, for Jakarta E. So in 9.1, it was upgraded from Java SE8 to Java SE11, and then actually in Jakarta E10, now we're potentially all the way up to Jakarta E17, and in Jakarta E11, it's going to be upgraded again, most likely to Jakarta E21 at this point, right? So always keeping up to date with the Java releases. The primary aim of Jakarta E9 and 9.1, and the reason why it was released early, ahead of time, ahead of Jakarta E10, is to give the ecosystem. So remember, a lot of libraries have dependencies, right? A lot of the stuff that you may be using, let's say the Spring framework, actually has dependencies on Jakarta E9, Jakarta E. So this is the reason why this was released ahead of Jakarta E10 and why so much effort was put into it. In fact, I believe the latest Spring framework release is no longer baselined on Jakarta E8. It's actually baselined on Jakarta E9. So if you are even looking at upgrading your Spring version or upgrading your Quarkus version or upgrading your you name it library version, you will probably be moving to Jakarta E9 or 9.1 sooner rather than later. Now, the change isn't that bad, right? But there's some other talks out there as to how to do the transition process. There's a lot of tools and IDE support that will help you make the transition. and there's some runtimes actually will support both Jakarta EE8 and 9.1 at the same time. Right? So Libertian is an example. Webster Libertian, Open Libertian is an example of that. Right. Moving forward. Okay, so all right, Jakarta 11 contributions guide. So I did want to talk to you now a little bit about the Jakarta EE ambassadors, and also talk to you about how you can begin thinking about contributing to Jakarta EE. So as I said, one of the key objectives of moving everything to the Eclipse Foundation is to facilitate people contributing, not just vendors, but also developers out there begin contributing. So the Jakarta ambassadors, that is one of our key objectives, right? It is about evangelizing the technology, making sure more people know about what is going on in the Jakarta space, and also advancing the technology as well. Both by contributing directly to Jakarta as well as contributing to the ecosystem around Jakarta, whether that's runtimes or whether it's something like microprofile or what have you. So for this reason, the Jakarta ambassadors actually have a specific contribution guide, that's aimed at telling you, hey, this is the ways you can contribute to this technology. So we had one for Jakarta E10, and actually a lot of the changes that we outlined in the contribution guide actually happened. We'll see that in a moment. Not all of it, but now we also have a Jakarta E11 contribution guide. So you can take a look at how you can contribute to the next version of Jakarta E rather than the current version. So if you want to find out more about the ambassadors, you need to log on onto the ambassadors website. I would say you can also follow the Twitter handle. There's some pretty good updates in the Jakarta ambassadors Twitter handle, just generally staying up to date with the technology set, as well as guiding you as to how you can begin contributing as well. So feel free to take a look at that. All right, so now let's begin to take a look at, so we talked about Jakarta E8, talked a little bit about Jakarta E9 and 9.1. Now I think we can begin to dive into Jakarta E10 and the changes that happened in Jakarta E10. So here's what I've done in this slide. So in this slide, what I've done is, as I said, in the ambassadors, we've outlined what we would like to see for a while now in our Jakarta E10 contribution guide. So I have compared what we had in the contribution guide versus what has actually been delivered in Jakarta E10 in this slide. Right? So you can see the color coding here. The stuff that's in green. Well, that's the stuff that made it into Jakarta E10. The stuff that's in sort of the yellowish color, yellowish orangish color. Well, that is stuff that is en route. Right? It started but didn't quite make it in the Jakarta E10 timeframe, but most likely will make it in a subsequent release. And then there's the gaps, right? Things that haven't been picked up yet, but has been identified as gaps by the Jakarta ambassadors that you could potentially fill by contributing yourself. So you can see the general lay of the land. So in terms of CDI alignment, the asynchronous annotation made it. Not many of the others made it quite yet. Some CDI alignment happened in the batch API, but then REST and concurrency is on the way. It's not quite there yet. We're hoping it's going to be done. In terms of SE alignment, it looks pretty good. The completion stage made it into the Jakarta concurrency API. There's now a Bootstrap API for REST. You can spin up Jakarta REST instances without a Jakarta runtime. But then messaging, we're hoping to see the same thing that hasn't happened yet. In terms of closing the standardization gaps, OpenID Connect is now supported by Jakarta E10. The JWT alignment still hasn't happened yet. This is in microprofile. We want to make sure that it is usable or available in some way in Jakarta EE. We also wanted to see a batch in the batch API. We wanted to see a Java-based API. Right now, it's XML-based configuration. So that has not happened yet, but it is slated. We wanted to see a portable way of defining managed executors definition. That has happened. We wanted to see more SQL support. That has happened. Multi-part from data in Jakarta REST. That has made it in. And also we'll talk about very important change. and that is to have a separate profile. And we'll talk about profiles in a moment, for Jakarta profiles in a moment. But we wanted to see a separate profile for microservices, right? And to enable the next generation of runtimes, rather than the sort of existing runtimes. We want to enable things like Quarkus and Helidon, potentially even Micronaut, to begin to use Jakarta EE and become Jakarta EE compatible runtimes. Okay, and then finally we talked about some of the deprecation and removal, and this is not it. This is not all of it. Hopefully, there'll be more deprecation in Jakarta E10 as well. So things like EJB entity bean, EJB2 style entity beans, the embeddable EJB container, deprecating some of the older servlet features that are rarely ever used. Some of that has happened. The new APIs are sort of en route. So Jakarta NoSQL is almost there. It's going to be going final soon. MVC has been final for a while. It's a question of whether we want to include MVC in addition to JSF into the Jakarta EE family or not. There's a configuration API that's been pending for a long time. It's now in part of microprofile. There's an effort to move it to Jakarta EE so that Jakarta EE can use it. There's a new repositories standard that was just launched. Support for gRPC is yet another thing that Jakarta would like to add, and that is a specification that was just launched as well. Obviously, did not make it in the Jakarta E10 timeframe. So another view of this is the net totality of what is in Jakarta E10. Actually, quite a bit. We'll talk about basically these changes in the remaining 20 minutes or so that we have of the presentation. Okay. So at a glance, this is how things look like. So in the end, actually quite a few changes. So Jakarta EE actually consists of different profiles, right? So the older runtimes, like let's say WebSphere and WebLogic, actually tend to implement the entire platform. Then there is a subset of it called the web profile, and that's a smaller set of APIs for Jakarta EE. So things like Tom EE, for example, and Payara Micro, those implement the web profile. And then finally, now we have another profile called the core profile. Talk about more about the core profile in a moment. But basically, overall, this is the landscape of change. So no new APIs per se, only real quote-unquote new one is CDI Lite. We'll talk about that CDI Lite in a moment. Some APIs that weren't changed at all, but majority of APIs actually went through at least some kind of change. Obviously, we'll talk about the changes next. All right. So I would like to start our tour of Jakarta E10 features with Jakarta concurrency. Actually, a lot of features went into Jakarta E concurrency. So adding max executor definition, max schedule definition that we were waiting for a while. So that has happened. Now, the asynchronous API used to be EJB specific. Now you actually have a CDI based asynchronous API in Jakarta concurrency. We also have some support as alignment with Java SE. So now you can use completable stage and frog join pool and parallel streams in a safe way in a Java EE application, because now it is built into the Jakarta concurrency API. And then finally, yet another interesting thing is that in EJB there is this scheduling mechanism that uses like sort of cron-like syntax. So now there's a programmatic equivalent of that in the Jakarta EE concurrency API. Hopefully we can add another @schedule annotation in the future that makes not a programmatic API, but a declarative API and annotation for exactly the same thing. All right. Let me see if there's any kind of questions in the Q&A. What is the relationship between Jakarta EE and microprofile now, and what does it look like going forward? Okay, so let me answer it. So these are complementary set of technologies. Basically, Jakarta EE deals with the most common things. Right? So we looked at all the APIs, things like Servlet, JSF, JPA, bean validation, CDI. Right? Those are very general purpose technologies, and those will continue to be developed under Jakarta. There's some things that are not really very appropriate for Jakarta. Right? So these are basically micro services specific things that are a little bit more more volatile, if you will, for lack of a better term. So these are things like distributed tracing using open telemetry, or metrics using perhaps Kubernetes, perhaps something else, things like Open API, and those things are not really appropriate. Those are not those are things that can change over time, right? So Jakarta EE aims for stability, whereas Microprofile is aiming for innovation. So those APIs, in my opinion, will continue to be developed under Microprofile, where Jakarta EE focuses more on the general purpose type of APIs. Other than that, they're complementary. There's no overlap per se. You can use in a majority of Jakarta EE based runtimes and a majority of Microprofile based runtimes, you can use these APIs together without really a significant amount of overlap, and there's good amount of interoperability as well. In fact, JWT is one of those areas where we need to work on the interoperability. So in short, that is basically the relationship. If it's okay, we can consider that answered. All right, so I don't know how many of you know this, but there is a managed executor service definition, in Jakarta EE. So there didn't used to be a portable way of defining those. They used to be defined in XML, vendor-specific XML, what have you. So that obviously is less than ideal. So the community wanted a portable way of defining these things. So now that is possible. You can define it via annotations, just like you would define a data source or JMS resource in Java EE. So now you can define all kinds of concurrency managed objects. Probably the most important one being managed executors. Okay, so this is how you do that in an example. All right, moving forward. The asynchronous annotation is yet another one. So this used to be EJB only, like you have to have an EJB in order to use the asynchronous annotation. That is no longer true, because now you have a asynchronous annotation in the Jakarta EE concurrency API. It's actually more powerful than the EJB one. So it is based on CDI, and this is an example of how you would apply it. Basically, it also supports completable futures versus the EJB one that only supports future. And this basically goes hand in hand with other things that have sort of broken out of EJB, like things like the transactional annotation that was made separate from EJB and available in all CDI beans as of Java EE 7. Okay, so this is more along those lines of making those kind of changes to sort of gradually move away from the EJB platform. Jakarta REST had a bunch of different changes. I won't discuss all of them. I'll just discuss the very prominent ones. So one important one is the standalone Bootstrap API. So for simple use cases, let's say you want to write a simple integration test, you don't have to spin up the entire Jakarta EE runtime or web profile or core profile runtime, what have you. If you just want REST, you can just spin up Jakarta REST on its own via the Bootstrap API. Another thing that has been sort of a long-standing gap that has been possible in a vendor-specific way for a while is support for multi-part form data. Some applications do use this for the REST endpoints, particularly ones that are used by sort of JavaScript front ends. Sometimes they do need multi-part form data support. So that is now standardized as part of Jakarta REST. At context, which is used to be the dependency sort of homebrewed one-off dependency injection mechanism for Jakarta REST, that is now being deprecated and is going to be replaced by CDI quite possibly in Jakarta EE 11. You'll have to begin to use the @inject annotation just like you would anywhere else. The only reason @context was ever made in was because JAXA REST or now Jakarta REST had a dependency injection mechanism before dependency injection was standardized in the platform. That's how the @context annotation is even how it even exists. There's some other things like a little bit better support for HTTP cookies if you want to manipulate those in a REST endpoint, and there's a little bit better default exception mapping as well. Okay, I won't go into too much details of those. You can always read the spec, or hopefully there'll be blog entries that explain these in greater detail. I'll show you a quick example of the Bootstrap API. This is how that looks like. So let's say you just want to spin up a REST endpoint and just make an invocation on a client. So you don't have to spin up an entire Java EE runtime to do that. You can just say se bootstrap.start and then give it whatever it is that you want to start. In this case, let's say you're using the client builder API to make an invocation on a REST endpoint, and basically you can start and stop the instance right from a Java application in this way. Let's say in a JUnit test. Okay, multi-part form data. That is how this looks like. It's actually a fairly robust API. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can either look at form parameters one by one, specifically, just like I'm doing here. So you would expect a multi-part form data request from the client side, probably JavaScript, and then you can parse out the specific parts of the multi-part form. Right? So you can take out, in this case, let's say name, the photo, and the resume, for example. Right? So you can also do it in a more generic fashion where you get all of the fields that constitute the multi-part form, and you programmatically parse out different parts of it. It's literally an array of entity parts. Okay, and you can get more metadata from it. So there's from an entity part you can get its media type, MIME type. Essentially, you can get the actual content and so on. Right? So that's how that looks like. Okay, moving on, I'd like to move into Jakarta security next. This has an important set of APIs for Jakarta EE as well. The most important one being a long-running request that people have, and that is that you can do OpenID Connect in a proprietary way in app servers. You used to be able to, right? So Liberty had a way of doing it, Wildfly had a way of doing it, Tommy had a way of doing it, but there was no standard API. Right? So now there is a standard API to do Jakarta security. Okay, so there is now officially OpenID Connect support, and it's portable across all runtimes. There was a few other things that happened. I think these are lower level. We're sort of running out of time, so I'm going to skip those over. You can find out more yourself. So this is how an example how an OpenID Connect definition would work. Again, just via simple annotation, you can place this on any class in your application and just provide the configuration details, and basically your application can be then use OpenID Connect for authentication, and it works with the rest of the Jakarta EE security subsystem. It's very similar to the way you had annotations for LDAP connectivity or database-based authentication. This is now the same type of semantics, only applying OpenID Connect. Okay, Jakarta persistence is actually one of the probably most frequently used Jakarta APIs, and again a bunch of different changes in here. I'll just talk about it at a high level before we move on in the interest of time. So now you can use UUID as keys. So this is useful if you don't want the keys generated in the database, so that the entity keys can actually be generated on the Java application level using UUIDs. There's actually a lot of math functionality, ceiling, exponent, floor. This used to be part of JPQL and the criteria API and so on, but now they are, right? So you can begin to use those. If you want to use these functionality, you don't have to break out into native SQL. You can now do these in JPQL. Similarly, to align with Java SE datetime APIs, there was a number of these type of local datetime-like functionality added in JPQL as well. You used to have to do that manually. So you have to get a date from the database and then convert it in some way. Now you can do that, or you allow the ORM to do that for you. Convert from the underlying database type into a Java datetime API. Now you can do the same thing in JPQL. Extract, I don't know how many people use that, but this is like again an SQL-ish function to do date manipulation. Now it's part of JPQL as well. And some simple changes like entity manager. If you happen to be writing those manually, those now implement auto-closable. So you can use try with resources if you want to. All right. This is an example of how UUID keys would look like, skipping over in the interest of time. Jakarta Faces has a number of changes that went into it. I won't go into it all. There's a nice blog entry out there that actually you can take a look at. I'm going to briefly talk through it. Client window scoped is a nice one. So this is a good replacement to conversation scope and flow scoped. It's more easier to use. Really nice one is now people used to ask for JSF pages to be written in pure Java, just like you can in Vaadin, for example. So now that is possible. Now there's a pure programmatic way of writing views with the view annotation. There's some other things now you don't have to use in JSF. You used to have an extension. It's a .xhtml or .jsf. Now, if you want, your Jakarta server pages can look like REST endpoints, so you can have an extension-less mapping if you want. There's various other things like improvements in the component specifications, like being able to specify the type attribute like email or date time or what have you. Multiple accept parameters in the input file. Some layout improvements in select many and select one radio. There's an on error attribute in WebSocket now. This was sort of a pain point for people using the declarative form of WebSockets in JSF and so on. And again, a few more deprecations. This is an example of simple example of how a pure Java Faces view might look like. Again, skipping over in the interest of time, feel free to take a look at the slide deck later. Okay, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the core profile. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have the full profile that has all of the Jakarta EE APIs and things like WebSphere and WebLogic and JBoss EAP. Those implement those. And then there's the web profile that's implemented by things like Pyra Micro and Tom EE. And now we actually have the core profile. And basically what this is literally just the APIs that microprofile needs. Okay, microprofile defines a set of APIs that are required, a very minimal set, namely just RESTful endpoints, JSON processing APIs, and dependency injection from Jakarta EE. Okay, that's really about it. Now, in most cases, these runtimes that use the core profile actually use a lot more than that of Jakarta EE. They'll provide support for things like JPA, for example. Okay, but basically the idea here is that this was aimed toward the new generation of lightweight runtimes. So things like Quarkus, OpenLiberty, Helidon, potentially Micronaut, right? These can all begin to implement the Jakarta EE core profile specifications and become compatible. Quarkus has plans to do that. Helidon has plans to do that. OpenLiberty has already done it. And in fact, if you look at microprofile 6.0, it actually defines a concrete dependency on Jakarta EE core profile. So if you're certified with microprofile 6, you're also certified with the Jakarta EE 10 core profile. Okay. Now, Micronaut folks, I don't think they're going to implement the core profile just yet. They may or may not, but they were heavily involved in this thing, CDI Lite. Okay, so the microprofile may use CDI Micronaut may use CDI as its component specification. Okay, very soon. So what has happened in CDI? Basically, the major change is CDI Lite. So the problem with CDI is that you cannot use it uses heavy use. It used to make use of heavy use of reflection. In particular, the extensions API, the CDI extensions API, made heavy use of reflection. So now that does not work in something like Graal VM, and Graal VM is supported by both Helidon as well as Quarkus. In fact, you could say those are the killer features of those frameworks. So basically, what was done in Jakarta EE 10 is to create a CDI Lite version that does work with native compilation. In particular, the main change here is basically changing from a compile time based or a runtime based extension API to a compile time based extension API. So there's a new extensions API basically. The other thing is that there's a little bit of a backward compatibility gotcha. Okay, so if you're using bean discovery mode all in CDI, you'll no longer be able to do that because again, it doesn't really work very well with native compilation. Okay, there are some other changes that I'm going to skip over real quick, and we'll finish our basic tour of Jakarta EE 10. Now Java SE 11 is baseline for Jakarta EE 10. Java SE 17 is supported, and in fact, most of the Jakarta EE runtimes actually support Java SE 17. There's a few nice changes in the batch API, a few changes in the JSON API, and overall a little bit better support for JPMS modules. Okay, moving forward. You can try all of this. So it's not just a matter of specifications. You can try out all of the changes in Jakarta E10 right away. Right. So there's already 4 implementations of Jakarta E, Eclipse Blastfish, Wildfly, Pyara, as well as Open Liberty, and there will be more coming soon. Most likely, you can expect at least Tom EE to be yet another implementation, Western Liberty to be certified, JBoss AP to be certified of Jakarta E10. In fact, I believe JBoss is planning to do that very, very soon. If you want to find out the latest compatibility list of who's compatible with Jakarta E10, follow this link. Okay. Now, in the last 5 minutes, let's talk about, let's return back to the topic of Jakarta EE11. Okay. So here's what I have done. In my first slide, I basically outlined everything and subtracted, the stuff that is either en route or delivered in Jakarta EE10. So that leaves us actually with this list. And so these are the kind of things, I won't go into them in great detail, just in the interest of time, but these are the kind of things that potentially could happen in Jakarta EE11. Okay, and those are all outlined in the Jakarta EE ambassadors contribution guide. So if you want to find out details of what these things are and you want to get involved in these APIs, you can do so. In fact, I would encourage you to hopefully consider doing that. Right? And if you need any help on how to do that, there's resources that the Jakarta EE ambassadors will provide that will help you with that. Okay, so there's many ways of contributing, and these are again outlined in the Jakarta EE11 contribution guide. At the bare minimum, you could join the mailing list to find out what is going on. If you want to advocate for a specific change, you can go onto each of the projects and look at their GitHub issue trackers. You can help implement a change yourself, or maybe even just something as simple as help with a website or help with documentation. It's very easy to do. All you really need to do is electronically sign the ECA, and you're good to go. Right? In order to just be a contributor. And of course, you can engage an ambassador and ask any questions, including myself, that will help you with contributing towards Jakarta EE11. All right, so I'm going to summarize 8.9.9.1, very significant changes, very important set of APIs. If you haven't looked at those yet, please do take a look at those and probably begin your migration process. Many important changes in Jakarta E10. Even if you're not a Jakarta EE user, these are changes that you can benefit from. Talked about some of the changes in Jakarta persistence, for example, Jakarta REST, deprecation in things like servlet and JSF, one ton of changes in JSF. Those are all important changes. I hope you will begin considering. And finally, I hope you will also begin to contribute to our Jakarta 11. Again, this is one of the reasons why we went through the process and trouble of moving from JCP into the Eclipse Foundation. So I hope you will take up that call to action and think about how you can contribute. All right, leave you with a few resources. If you don't attend Jakarta 1, please consider taking a look at the recorded sessions. Right, so that's jakarta1.org. We're going to be having another next edition of Jakarta 1 probably in the October-November timeframe. It's virtual and free. If you joined just one mailing alias, please join the Jakarta EE Community 1 to stay up to date with Jakarta EE. If you just follow one Twitter handle, please make that the official Jakarta EE Twitter handle to get updates about what is going on with Jakarta EE. And then finally, think about joining the Jakarta Tech Talks. I'll be delivering one just in a few weeks, actually. Again, free and virtual. Right? You can join that without paying anybody anything, and stay up to date with this technology set. All right, and that is all that I have, and I'm actually also out of time. So let me know if you have any last-minute questions, either in the chat or in the Q&A. I will answer them. Other than that, I hope this was useful, and I hope I hope you'll consider all of the things that I presented, and maybe even consider presenting this the slide deck yourself. Again, the slide deck is available to you with speaker notes via the Jakarta EE Ambassador site.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Reza. If you do have any last minute questions, do jump into the Q&A. Do you want to do our last poll very quickly if people have a moment to stay online?
Sure, that's fine.
Perfect. Okay, a poll is coming your way. What are you most excited for in Jakarta EE 10? So we have a lot of options there. I think some of these have been shortened down ever so slightly. So that is asynchronous in Jakarta concurrency there in the middle. And also some of those are support for, say, multi-part and form data in REST. Just a word or two missing, but do vote and tell us what you're most excited for. And we'll give you all a moment to do that. A lot of people excited about the form data. That did look very good. And Reza, do you kind of agree with the audience here on how they're polling?
Well, all of these were, long pending changes. So honestly, for me, it's a toss-up. I don't particularly have a favorite myself. I'm curious to know, what are people interested in using in Jakarta E10?
And if you do want to add a little bit more context to your excitement, do let us know in the chat. And I'll leave the poll open for another moment. I think multi-part and form data and REST is winning. A lot of excitement. I'm going to close off our poll. Thank you, everyone, for voting. And just before we go, Reza, thank you so much. That was an incredible, incredible talk. I really enjoyed it. That's definitely made me excited to look back and go, maybe I should get back into Java again. It has been a while. But before we do log off as well, I want to say a very quick reminder for all of the Andelans in today's call that you can jump into Andela chat at any time, especially for our Java community. If you go into Skill Java on Andela chat with us every day of the week, share your issues, share your excitement, go into more detail about what you're excited for in the upcoming updates. Do meet us for other virtual calls and maybe even some in-person calls or in-person meetups this year. And do reach out to Amuda, our community champion for Java, if you have any questions. Just want to get that in there to make sure that we're all staying connected after today's call. If you aren't a member of Andela at the moment, do visit our website, andela.com, and sign up today. Reza, thank you so much again. I'm going to let you go. I'd imagine your Monday morning's very busy. And thank you, everyone. I hope to see you on another call soon. Bye bye.